Just a quick note for our listeners before we start this episode, which features Linda Lubey. At the time of our recording, Linda had been the regional director for Region 2 for the New York State Department of Transportation. Since then, she's been named the new director of the Office of Traffic Safety and Mobility. Since this announcement occurred after our conversation, it's not reflected in this episode. However, we did feel it was important to note it. Thank you and enjoy.
We're celebrating Women's History Month, and we're doing it the best way we know how, by highlighting a leader who's not only shaping transportation in New York State, but also the world of women in transportation.
The New York State Department of Transportation presents the DOT POD.
And welcome into the DOT POD. I'm Josh Heller.
And I'm Anya Cardos.
And we are delighted to have you joining us. Well, today we're joined by Linda Lubey, Regional Director for DOT's Mohawk Valley region. Now, Linda started her career when the transportation field was still mostly dominated by men. But she didn't just enter the field. She rose through it and now is a leader among leaders.
And that's why we're super excited to have her onto our show today to share her own insights on leadership, recruiting the next generation of transportation professionals, and to also share a bit more about a very important person in her life who truly influenced her career and shaped her perspective on what it means to be a leader. Welcome, Linda.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's kick things off like we usually do, learning a bit about our guests. Tell us a little bit about your history here with DOT, how long you've been with DOT.
So I started in DOT in 1998, so I think that makes it 28 years.
Congratulations.
Yeah, in March. And I came from the private sector out of college, so I worked for design consultants that also did consulting for DOT. So in much of my work at the time, even though I worked out of the Utica office for my consulting firm, it was for New York State DOT Region 8. So I became very versed in the beautiful Hudson Valley and all the highways and safety concerns in that area.
Parkways.
Yeah.
Parkways.
Yeah. And at one point I became a project manager for crash analysis they call it priority investigation locations for high crash locations. And I studied hundreds of high crash locations.
That had to be really interesting.
Yeah, in the Hudson Valley. And it's a great training ground for anybody that wants to become a traffic engineer, to study crash analysis and traffic volumes. There's the region, along with regions, of course, 10 and 11 and Region 5 and, the heart of downtown in Syracuse and Region 4 in Rochester, these are, and Buffalo, of course, high traffic volume areas. And I don't come from my area in the Mohawk Valley is nice and quiet. And we get phone calls when people have to wait for 2 turns of a traffic light, so it's a little different. So for me in my training to become a transportation engineer and with an expertise in traffic engineering, I so enjoyed that time in Region 8. I have very much affinity to that region and very excited for Julianne Fuda, who's now our regional director down in Region 8, to be at the helm of such a great region.
So let's go back in time when you first got your start in this field. Today we have a female commissioner, we've got a female chief engineer, as well as several women in major leadership roles here within our department. But early on in your career, were there moments when you were maybe the only woman in the room, or maybe one of a few women in the room?
Absolutely. Yeah, but it's weird because it wasn't just the profession I went into. I grew up with 2 brothers. And my neighborhood was mostly boys, too. So I have an affinity. I was a bit of a tomboy. I'm not the typical girl. And so I think I always fit very well in with boys. And becoming an engineer was just what you did in my family because my father was an engineer, my grandfather was an engineer, both my brothers are engineers. And the rest of my family are either teachers or public servants of some sort. And I honestly thought that was the only thing that you did. If you were good in math and science, you became an engineer. So I didn't really think much about it. That's just, I was good in math and science, and that's what my dad told me I should do because I'm good in math and science. And I honestly only thought there were two different engineering schools at the time. You know, it wasn't like now where, you know, these young people are able to look all over the world, really, you know, for where they're going to get their education. You know, way back when it was Clarkson or RPI. You either go to Clarkson or you go to RPI. And I have one brother that went to Clarkson and one brother that went to RPI. So I really thought that those were the only two schools. I did land in RPI for just a semester because I was the baby girl in the family and wasn't quite ready to be away from home. And so I ended up transferring to Mohawk Valley Community College and finished my the first 2 years in community college with mostly all men. And then I transferred to environmental science and forestry at Syracuse University for, it's a state school, but it used to be kind of interconnected with Syracuse University when I was there. So a lot of my core engineering classes were at SU, and then more my environmental and water resources and stuff like that was at ESF. So that my class, I think there was 2 other women maybe in my class at ESF, very small school. There were 2 other women, and and typically my best friends were always men because that's, you know, what I was always used to.
Yeah, you were in school. Yeah.
You know, you mentioned your dad, and we want to talk about family a little bit, you know, because your story has a lot to do with family and specifically your dad. Would you mind talking a little bit about him and his leadership and legacy and really his, you know, his impact on you both personally and professionally?
Sure. And he actually worked for DOT for over 30 years.
Oh, my.
So he moved up all the way from, he started with a contractor, but then once he came to DOT and he wanted to get back to Utica because he just, we're all very proud to be born and raised in Utica. You know, my grandfather, like I said, was an engineer. He was the city engineer for the city of Utica and built under his watch, they built the Utica Memorial Auditorium, which is now the Adirondack Bank Center. Home
of the Utica Comets.
Right, and which is a civil engineering landmark, which my brother Paul got that distinction, you know, in the for a civil engineering landmark. So pretty exciting there too. And my dad just the way he raised me, and I just always felt like I was to do anything that my brothers could do, and I didn't ever doubt that I would follow in his footsteps to some degree. His path was construction. He loved highway construction, and he moved up in DOT from, you know, coming in as a young engineer in construction and moved up through the ranks to become an engineer in charge, eventually a construction supervisor, to ultimately becoming the regional construction engineer. And he prided himself on hiring the most of the people that end up in DOT because we have so much staff that starts as a TCI, a transportation construction inspector. And I did that in college for 1 season, I think I did, because I was also a nanny. But my dad told me in my last year of college, you really should become a TCI, you know, for 1 season and figure out if this is someplace you want to land. And so under his era, I was a transportation construction inspector for 1 construction season. And I also knew at the time that I don't think construction's my path.
So you knew that wasn't where you wanted to go, but where did you find yourself leaning towards?
Well, I definitely like the environmental part of engineering, so that's why I landed in environmental science and forestry, ESF, in Syracuse. I'm an outdoors person, so I kind of started gear that direction a little bit. I honestly was interested in so many different things. I knew what I wasn't interested in. Like, I'm not a structures person, you know, and boy, do I admire them. And but that's not, you know, that was not for me. I did good in structures classes, but I definitely geared more towards the environmental. And it's funny, I wasn't introduced too much to traffic engineering in college, and it wasn't until my first job working for a design consultant that my supervisor he had a master's degree in traffic engineering. And I was hired as an entry-level engineer to work on a New York State DOT projects down in Region 8. So all my time for all my first learning in the profession was all for a DOT project down in Region 8, which was down in Rockland County. And that's where I started to learn all of what it takes to develop a transportation project from the ground up. We call it phase 1 through 4, from the time you scope a project to the time you get design approval. That's the type of work I was doing for Region 8 at the time.
You're talking about projects that last a long time, like their lifetime could be 70 years or something. And some of these are very, very iconic structures. Talk about your leadership style and how that carries into these projects and how you lead in order to get these things done, the work that needs to get done. Did you learn that from your father? What was this like? What would you say your style is?
So I'm really big into transportation solutions, the big picture, so I love the type of, because some engineers like the detail work, when I talk about structures, that final design of how to make the structure, last for 100 years and that detailed design. I'm more of that phase 1 through 4 type girl, the one that was looking at the big picture, that transportation solution. What's going to help the community? What's going to be a game changer? Because transportation it's an economic pusher. A lot of what we do on the ground to improve our transportation system spurs development, spurs walkability, spurs bike lanes and all that kind of stuff. All those things help a community. So, and I learned that throughout my career. In terms of taking that into a leadership style, I always, with my young staff, I always wanted to get them looking at that big picture. Always try to look ahead at the final solution. Don't be just looking at a very narrow, we've got this paving job and it's this many miles and we have to, get that pavement service. Well, what else is going through that community? What else can we be thinking about? So I like that to keep the excitement, I guess. I love my job. I love what we do. I love the impact we have in our community. So I believe that we can do so much good in transportation. So I try to get that excitement into people. And I'm very big, and I think it's in my bio too, that when we hire people and we're developing our staff and mentoring and seeing, where they're driven to, it's like really trying to find the right fit for them.
That's key.
Yeah.
You got to find the right fit for people.
Exactly.
They can't just be in a spot where they're maybe not succeeding. So you're changing that. You're changing that within your region.
I try to get people excited about the work that they do. I just, because, and if they're not happy with what they're doing, well, then there's something else. We have so much to offer. There's so much. I'm from, everything from operations to environmental to construction to highway maintenance to, there's so much. And especially for me, coming out with this kind of environmental degree, and here I'm a traffic engineer, but even just, I can tie that to environmental because every time we're reducing delay, we're reducing emissions and we're helping the climate, So, there is a tie to that environment. So even though that I didn't go the route of environmental engineering, I still feel that the work we do in transportation impacts so many different areas.
You mentioned, leadership, and obviously that's all part of it. But I think one of the other important things for leaders to do is to cultivate leadership in others. How is that something that you're trying to do for the younger generations who are going to be taking the mantle, at some point, so that they have the same kind of passion, that they have the same kind of perspective that you guys do?
So I think, back to the biggest thing for somebody to grow in their careers is to make sure that they're doing what they love to do, So I know that that you might be interviewing WLDB at some point, but I introduced to them. There's this Sparketype that Jonathan Fields created. It's not an assessment for personality. It's more what drives you, what brings you joy, what type of work brings you joy. And I had my whole leadership team get their Sparketype to find out, what drives them. And I did my own, and I found out that for me, I'm considered a sage, which is like a teacher. And I don't think I'm a good teacher, but that's not what it is. It's not your strength. It's not what you're good at, but it's what brings you joy. So that first thing with our people is to ensure that they're doing the work that truly brings them joy. And I stress that all the time. At the end of the day, that the job satisfaction, the contribution, they should feel good about the work that they're doing. And as far as leadership, I'm a servant leader, so it goes to being kind. That's really, it's caring about your people, to realize that there's so much more going on, in everybody's lives than what we see in the office. You have no idea what somebody's been through, what they're going through, what's to come. And we just have to treat each other with kindness. And so, Rob Fitch and I, we teach servant leadership for our resident engineer orientation program. And that's what we teach. We teach servant leadership and the values and things that go along with being a servant leader. And number one is listening. Listen to your staff. Don't take the time to just start speaking and guessing what they're going to ask you, or to jump into an answer or share something that, that reminds me of this when in my career, right? Listen to them. And if we were all better at that, we're all going to become better leaders and coworkers and colleagues and friends and all of it.
We started off the top of this episode touching on Women's History Month. How do you feel this kind of approach is widening the door for women, but basically the people that we haven't seen that much of represented in the field of engineering and within STEM, basically? How are you widening that door, do you feel?
I work with so many amazing people, both men and women. But I do think that we've learned so much from men in a lot of leadership books, throughout generations. And there's not enough voice of women out there, of leadership books written by women and the different styles. I think we've got a lot to learn. There's been so many amazing women, in history that I think that there's not as much thought and education related to women's achievements, I'll say. So
within DOT and maybe outside, and women that have inspired you?
Oh, there's so many. But I will talk about a woman. She was a school teacher in my area and was a school psychologist, and she developed a leadership program for teenagers. And an incredible woman. She passed away from cancer at the age of 60, way too young. But she built this leadership program for teens that both of my sons went through, and it was phenomenal. It was the ability to break down walls and judgment and when you pick, group people together. She would do it on day one, just kind of break down all those walls that everybody's the same. We're all human, right? We all have feelings and we all love and have fear and all those things. And she was able to do that with these teenagers. And it's just like a week-long summer camp. And they become so empathetic of other people and what she teaches. And it was just so beautiful. And my husband and I, hope to bring that back, after her passing. I have some close friends that we are working to bring back teen leadership. I think it's really, really important to start that leadership concepts and that servant leadership at a very young age.
So we did talk a little bit about your dad, and you shared some nice thoughts about him. Tell us his name and who he was, and kind of about how maybe you're bringing sort of his style and what you learned from your father and how you see the future.
So my dad, his name is David Romano, and there's still a staffing plan in construction that's named after him, Romano Tynan staffing plan, that they use to staff our construction projects with both transportation construction inspectors and the rest of the team.
That's awesome.
I don't think we're staffed the way we used to be. So they try to use that as a model and try to staff as up to it as they possibly can. But he was very well known for that. And like I said, he built his career in construction, and at one point even considered coming to the main office to be the office director for construction. Very, very well respected. But my dad also didn't want to be away from his family at all. So very much a family guy. When I started with DOT, my dad hadn't retired yet, so I started in Region 3. And because I didn't want to be in the same region as my dad, and then eventually I transferred to Region 3 after he had retired, or from Region 3 to Region 2 after he retired. And so when I came to Region 2, everybody knew me because I was Dave Romano's daughter. And most people said, your dad hired me, your dad promoted me, your dad really looked out for me when I was going through some really tough times. Your dad knew that I was on a promotional list and waited to fill a position to the point where he knew that I would be reachable. So it was those stories. One gentleman said to me, your dad was my spirit guide, in a sense when I lost my baby daughter, so it was those stories, that I realized my dad was such a good person, which I already knew, but the fact that he, what a legacy he left. And that's, all of us as leaders, managers, supervisors, to treat people just kindly. Those are the things that are going to be remembered.
Right. Very true.
So last episode, somewhat apropos, we talked about different hobbies that some of our teammates here at DOT have. And Linda, we didn't have you on the episode, but we certainly could have, because you have some fun hobbies as well. Tell us a little bit about some of the things you do outside of the office.
What brings you joy outside of the office?
So when we talk about joy, I know, Anya, you know that I have a dance background, so it's certainly dancing has always brought me joy. I try to stay connected, still take some adult classes. I was in the Nutcracker a couple of years ago.
That's
but
great.
Just as an adult, in the party scene, nothing really hard dancing. But I have been formally trained in ballet, and then I've taken that into different types of dance. And I'd say today, in my age, I prefer lyrical and modern dance. And so that brings me joy, just the music and the movement. A lot of times I'll dream of myself dancing, But in terms of like a hobby that I've recently developed, because I am a math geek, as an engineer, a lot of times, you say that you're a math geek. And I'm so much of a math geek that even in my spare time, I started practicing numerology. So I'm super into numerology, and I started to do readings for my friends and stuff. So that's been a lot of fun, and that's kind of put me on a spiritual journey and that kind of stuff too. But it's a great little hobby that just keeps me, from the workplace to the more, the spiritual side of things.
Kind of connects the two a little bit for you.
Yeah. And then everybody knows me as I'm one that write odes. I when somebody retires, I typically, if there was somebody that is deserving of an ode, I would write
of a Linda Lubey ode.
Yeah, I will write an ode. And I used to, when I was a traffic engineer for 10 years in Region 2, I would write a ode at the end of each year. And I used to call it Random Thoughts for Traffic and Safety. And they were just like silly thoughts of stuff that happened throughout the year. And I would do that every year and post it up. The ode that I brought with me today is what I did when I became the regional director. I wrote an ode to the New York State DOT traffic engineer that I passed on to the next senior one, because I was the senior traffic engineer when I moved up to regional director, and I wrote an ode for them.
Can you read a short passage from that?
Short passage? Oh, that's hard. Let's see. Where could I go? Well, I'll just start in the beginning. The heart and soul of transportation is a traffic engineer with wit and vision, always serving to balance the needs of multiple users with your expertise. With reduced delay and efficiency in mind, you spearhead ideas that are one of a kind, determining the very best traffic control for good level of service with a safety goal. How about that?
I like that.
I do like that.
Very
I like
much.
it. Very nice.
Yeah. We'll need an ode to the dot pod.
And I
Yeah.
did do an ode to the resident engineer. I probably should have brought that one,
Ooh.
but this one happened to be in my file today. But I did. So Rob Fitch organized that operations managers meeting back in September. I don't know if you guys
Yes.
have gone to that.
I went to
Yeah. So I delivered an ode to the resident engineer, and then I framed it for each of my resident engineers in Region 2, so they all have it up on their walls.
Something personal from Linda. I love it. I really do.
Well, Linda, first of all, thank you so much for taking some time and chatting with us about all of this, about your journey, about what it is you do, about your experience, and thank you for passing that on to us, and thanks for what you're doing, not only in the region, but cultivating and developing the future of the agency.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's really, really wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Well, that'll just about do it for us here from the DOTPOD. Thanks again to Linda Lubey for joining us, and thanks to each and every one of you for tuning in wherever and however you may be doing so. Anya, another one in the books.
I really love learning more about people in leadership roles, any role here, but learning more about them as people outside of work, but also their vision and what they truly feel about their job. I love learning about that. I really
Absolutely.
do. Very
Absolutely.
cool.
So again, thanks so much for tuning in. Podcast at dot.ny.gov. That's the easiest way to get in touch with us. That's podcast at dot.ny.gov. So she's Anya, I'm Josh. Until next time, we will be right here on the DOT POD.